Robots Radio presents...
Today's chat is brought to you by the support of all our Twitch subscribers. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through the Twitch platform, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a subscriber of the FFC and gaining access to some exclusive features over in the Discord server, please be sure to visit our Twitch account and click on the subscribe button. If you're an Amazon Prime member, remember that you do have a free subscription to Twitch every month that can be used for this. And for those of you who are already subscribers, thank you again for your generosity.
You may have heard the whispers of guardians gathering in the shadows, exploring the mysteries of this world and the worlds which surround us. We are all in search of truth. Sometimes we need to focus that search. Focus that fire. And so we come together. Welcome to Focused Fire Chat.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat Extra Lore, recording on January 19th, 2021. As always, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who is tuning in. We really appreciate that. And thank you for joining us once again. This week, we are actually going to be talking about Halo, as has become the norm for the extra lore here recently. We're going to be diving into the Insurrection for these two episodes. So this particular episode is what will serve as what we have come to call the intro session of the week's exploration. But before we go any further, however, let's run through a quick introduction of who all we have with us on the show. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86, and once again, as becomes the norm for our Halo extra lores, we are joined by pensHALO, our resident Halo lore master. Pens, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, thanks.
So I guess real quick, I'll get yelled at if I don't put in some special announcements real quick. We, as always, want you to let us know how we're doing over on the lorenetwork.com. It's a collection of a lot of different lore content creators throughout, not just on Destiny, but also on Dungeons & Dragons. We got Cyberpunk, we got Fallout, and then what's the other one that I always forget is Elder Scrolls Online. So please give us a look over there. And also, if you want to catch us live ourselves, we normally have our episodes streamed live every Friday night at 10 p.m. over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat. So if you have a couple minutes to spare and you want to see how the shenanigans get orchestrated over there, that's definitely where you want to check us out. But like I said, we're gonna be talking about the Insurrection in the Halo universe. So, Pence, I guess when we say the Insurrection, a really easy place to start. What is that? Is that a particular series of battles? Is it a particular conflict? I'm assuming it is a particular conflict, but what does it mean? What does it mean?
Yeah, it's more a series of conflicts. It's more, in some ways, it's kind of just a state of being is not the right way to say it. Let me put it this way. Throughout history, whenever you have colonial expansion, and anyone who's taken U.S. history knows this as well, the further away you get from the home country, the greater the chance that a nationalism starts to grow between those who are there, especially if there's a perception of lack of representation or manipulation or just being taken advantage of. This usually leads, the initial part is maybe subtle or non-violent protests, but after a period of time where, especially if things don't improve or if they get worse, it becomes a greater chance for violence between the colonies and the mother nation. When you're talking about the Halo universe, the Insurrection is essentially, it's the proper name given to what was an undeclared war that was fought between the United Earth Government and the United Nations Space Command and a number of loosely organized groups of rebels over control of the outer colonies that in the UEG. In the Halo universe, again, there was a wave of expansion from Earth to the other planets in the Sol system. And yes, there was an interplanetary conflict that occurred mainly because of that as well, that led to the growth of the UNSC. But when we're talking about the colonization of the Halo universe, just up to the point of the Human Covenant War, between 2362 and 2390, that was the first wave of extrasolar colonization, colonization outside of the Sol system, and what would eventually be the inner colonies. This ended up, the group that was selected to be part of this first wave were some of the best and brightest from Earth and the other Sol-based colonies, Mars, Luna, and whatnot. These expeditions were also heavily escorted by the UNSC Navy and Marines to maintain security, and also, since the end of the Interplanetary War, the UNSC military was exceedingly large. And to kind of justify the upkeep, that's why the Navy and Marines are sent out with all of these colonial missions. It ended up that the first wave of colonies settled about 210 worlds. These are what would be known as the inner colonies. One of the more common ones is Reach, and Harvest were both inner colonies. Reach was an inner colony. Now, in the century after that wave, that's where you started seeing the colonization of what would become known as the outer colonies. This wave of colonization, because the way it was handled, was bound to be more unstable. The recruitment standards were not the best of the brightest. They were loosened very considerably. They were less supervised, and the focus was more on resources than on the people. Corporations would essentially conscript people to colonize, or they'd convince pardoned criminals to go out with the idea of a second chance. Also,
how history loves to repeat itself.
Oh yes, for all the what for Australia was essentially settled as a penal colony, if I remember correctly. Is that the history that I remember right?
Yeah.
Yes, gotta love the British.
We need to colonize it, but we don't want to send our people. So
yes.
You guys go. You don't have any say in this.
So like I said, and then also there, I mean, as with any group of people, there are those that just aren't satisfied or just need a new start. So the second wave of colonization also included people who were unhappy with the Earth government, and they left via both illegal and illegal means. Again, these were just people who, for whatever reason, ran into hard times, couldn't manage money, and they just wanted to start over again. So they became part of that second wave. Also, this wave that first wave, like I said, also had a lot of military for security. The second wave really didn't have that. Now, the UEG, the United Earth Government, had set up the Colonial Military Administration, the Colonial Administration Authority. Both were essentially UEG agencies, is the right that were designed to manage the outer colonies.
Okay.
So, but so there was a military presence there, but in the end, in many cases, because the Colonial Military Administration was pulled from people in the colonies, or if they worked with people in the colonies for so long, their loyalties kind of stayed with the colonies over Earth. In the end, the second wave of colonization consisted of over 600 worlds. So the outer colonies outnumbered the inner colonies by about somewhere between 2 and 3 to 1. Because the outer colonies were less regulated and whatnot, you had a lot of, like I said, a lot of illegal activities. Piracy grew. So you had a lot of these colonies that started putting in requests for support because the colonial military administration didn't have the resources or didn't enforce the rules and protect the people. So they would request support, and this is where you started seeing the UNSC proper getting involved in the outer colonies. So by 2490, like I said, the colonies had outnumbered the inner colonies by about 3-1. And again, as with any colonial situation, your outer colonies start becoming more nationalistic about the citizens. They started thinking of themselves as, people from Eridanus or Tribute or Harvest, and not really as members of the UEG. This kind of attitude initially started seeing, when you start seeing people banding together, having a nationalistic sense of pride, anything that's outside of that is seen as a outside, not really malevolent, but an unwanted presence. And this is how the UEG and the UNSC started being seen. Because of this, you started seeing more civil disobedience. And like I said, some of this started off as just being relatively peaceful. People refusing to pay taxes was probably the most common. Happen. Oh no!
Did they throw their coffee in the local harbor?
Would you throw coffee in a harbor?
I would not throw coffee, but I would throw tea. Yes. I will accept tea as a substitute for coffee to be thrown into a harbor.
Yeah, no, it's
especially in protest to taxation without represent. What?
Yeah. Well, Starbucks I might throw because that stuff's just straight up vile. But yeah,
shots fired.
Yes. Okay.
So basically,
opinions voiced are not necessarily the opinion of FOC.
Yeah, but basically, what it sounds like is it's very, very akin to what has happened in our own real history.
Yeah.
Which makes it actually even more believable, I think would be the word I'm looking for. Or understandable, like able to be connected to.
It's rooted in reality.
Right. Yeah. And I actually really appreciate the parallel that is being drawn here.
So it started off with refusal to pay taxes, and also because the colonies were supposed to be managed, the settlements had to be authorized. Well, what you started seeing were people would create unauthorized settlements. You may have this city here, but you'd move off someplace else and create another city and essentially try to keep yourself off grid as much as you can. That way you wouldn't have the interference from any outside authority.
And that also goes back to the taxation thing.
Yes. Now, like I said, you had the Colonial Administration Authority, the CAA, was set up to help manage colonies. And they actually were the ones who had the most direct say. So, being that they were local, they actually tried to make concessions to ease the situation. The idea of registration of births, totally voluntary. If you wanted to, when you're talking taxes and your family size, if you want to say that you only got 2 people and when you have a family of 5, okay, things like that. And they also, one of the other things was, they would offer free vaccination programs. Now, this actually was one of the things that the outer colonies kind of bought into in a very large fashion. Hey, you get free vaccinations, free healthcare. Great. Yeah, that's, okay, it's one way to show that you care about the people. Anyone who knows anything about the Halo universe would say
I don't see where this is going to end badly at all. What? This couldn't go bad at all.
Well, what it did do is it provided a database of genetics that were used later on in the Halo story to help develop the Spartan 2 program. So, yeah.
Because what's a better insult than using outer colony indoctrinated soldiers to fight the outer colonies?
Mm-hmm. Headed
still
by a
remember
scientist that was born in the Outer Colonies too.
Yeah, like I still remember when I first kind of put those two things together, and I was like, wait, hang on, what? Like that is huge.
Mm-hmm. And while I mean, obviously, this is found in a number of novels, but one of the places that actually it touches on it, and in a good way, is in the Hunt the Truth podcasts. It's actually mentioned in there too. So
it is, yeah.
It's as I think we almost mention almost all the time. It's like Hunt the Truth. If Hunt the Truth still a podcast is still out there, and it's worth listening to. It's really well done.
Yeah, it's extremely well done.
So, okay, now, but at this time, diplomacy was still being advocated by a large group of people for the colonists at the Colonial Administration Authority, and even the UNSC. One of the largest advocates for diplomacy was a UNSC admiral by the name of Gabriela Castaneda. She was a very large proponent for diplomacy, even though that once the Insurrection happened, she was very a highly decorated admiral. And just as a fun fact, after her death, her brain was actually used as a basis of a smart AI known as Gabriela, GBA 0983-6, that would eventually be the AI caretaker for Outpost Discovery.
That's cool.
Yeah. For any of you who had the chance to go to Outpost Discovery and see the AI on your way in, yeah, that's her. Okay. After time, unfortunately, diplomacy really only was getting so far, and there was a growing discontent in the outer colonies. And this discontent led to Earth and inner colonies starting to feel threatened. They were surrounded. They were outnumbered 3-1, and they could see the beginnings of possibly losing control. You know, okay, you have all these worlds that are out there rebelling against us. That could cause major issues. So what you started seeing was the United Earth Government, the UNSC, the Colonial Administration Authority, and the Colonial Military Authority starting to exert larger amounts of military and economic control. Taxes were raised, trade restrictions were put in place, to try to maintain control and extract what they felt was fair. They provide, the inner colonies provided all these goods and, paid for defense either through the CMA or UNSC to help protect the people. They felt that, okay, well, you need to pay your taxes. Well, of course, being the taxed, especially when you're dealing with, and in much like a situation that was with America in its colonial days, the outer colonies were providing raw materials to the inner colonies, and the inner colonies were creating the products that they would then be sold back. So there was this perceived inequity, and maybe not necessarily just perceived, but there was an inequity between what they were getting for sending the raw materials and what they had to spend to get the manufactured ones. So they tried putting tighter and tighter controls on, but the tighter your grip, the more sand goes through your fingers.
Yep, I was about to say the tighter they grasp, the more it slipped away.
Yeah.
Which again is a pretty common. That's not just American history. That's also if you look at like the Roman conquest and stuff like that. Even way back in time, that was a similar thing too. Is once you start getting into the deadly cycle, that deadly cycle, it's kind of the writings on the walls almost.
Yeah, you start going down that path, it's very, very hard to turn around or stop.
Yeah.
So the tighter control actually led to the creation and expansion of more radical secessionist elements. What you ended up having was, between 2475 and 2483, you started to see more and more uprisings occur, and these actually started becoming more and more violent. So now these were being put down pretty swiftly by the CMA, but they were also very severely. And much like was seen in history, these tactics tend to backfire, which would lead to more resistance.
Well, before we jump onto the CMA's poorly managed response, let's take a quick mental ad break. And just get clear our heads real quick.
Tune into the Spinfoil Theory podcast for questions. Who is an orc? Who's an orc? What is an orc? What is that? For queries.
Did the Hive really just body shame the Vex into changing their frames?
For special guests.
All the guests.
For Spinfoil Theories. Mara
Even
saw
Levante
the
is
Sabbathoon. The Spinfoil Theory podcast. Insert information here. So he didn't give the information. Give the information.
Spinfoil Theory is available on Spotify, iTunes, and Podbean. You can also get us at Twitter at Spinfoil Theory and or spinfoiltheory@gmail.com.
So okay, so with the uprisings that have started in 2475 through 2483, we're looking at that kind of irreversible tide of conflict that is starting to swell, and then the CMA, which real quick, remind me, that is the
Colonial Military Authority.
Essentially, colonial.
Essentially,
yeah.
It is a.
Is that like a branch of the UNSC?
Yeah,
in the colonial areas.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's the easiest way to describe it. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So they are trying, and that's the one that is also more heavily composed of colonial people or colonial members, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they started off with being members of the UNSC and UEG. They were just stationed out there.
Right. Okay.
But,
okay.
Obviously, because they're there, they're working with the people more directly. They kind of became more sympathetic. And they identified
right, yeah.
with it more.
I mean, even if they were from the inner colonies, I can totally see the tension there being, well, these are not just people that you're, overseeing. These are your neighbors, and sometimes maybe even your family if you, grew up or you married into that area. And also, I mean, like as I'm sure some people would join with the CMA from the colony. I mean, I can totally see this as kind of being a very, very politically tense scenario. But regardless, the CMA was also the one that put down the uprisings.
Yeah, they were the ones who, unfortunately,
or at least at first, right?
Yeah, well, they were the ones who had to.
Right. Well, yes, yeah. I mean, they basically, they were the only ones out there.
Right. They were the ones who had to, and they still, in a way, took commands from the UNSC and the UEG, so they did.
I can see how this could backfire pretty spectacularly.
And of course, I mean, just like with anything, I mean, people are different across the board. So there were some that just wanted to live their lives. There were some that wanted to stay loyal to the UEG and whatnot. And then you had those who wanted to secede. Well, because of the tactics and the pressures that were being placed upon the outer colonies, the ones in leadership positions started to become more sympathetic to those insurrectionists. And up until the late 25th century, these were all very small groups. They were scattered. Well, what you started to see, especially after towards the tail end of the 2480s, was solid formation of groups. One of them being the People's Occupation, the other one being the Secessionist Union. These were groups that had kind of came under one banner with the thought of, okay, we're going to push for independence. And actually, in 2487, there was a formal request for independence filed with, I think it was a couple dozen planets, or a dozen or so.
Oh, so planets. they tried to legitimately go the quote unquote peaceful route.
Now, obviously, the request was not accepted.
Right.
And what we started to see about 10 years after that, well, what you started to see once you started having these formal groups and they started these filings, you started seeing the Colonial Military Administration actually providing information, funding, and some equipment to these groups. Again, they were kind of sympathetic to these groups. They identified with them. They may have been neighbors. They may have been family in some cases. So the UEG, seeing this and realizing that the CMA is not really enforcing the laws right now, they're kind of, I'm not going to say they've, well, maybe in a way they've kind of gone rogue, but they've kind of leaned towards the, the colonies and not the central government.
They're kind of cherry picking who they're enforcing rules on, right?
So what you started to see was the UEG starts dismantling the CMA. And by 2497, now in 2497, the involvement of the CMA with insurrectionist groups goes public. Because of this, this is what spurs the UEG to dismantle the CMA, and they replace it with the UNSC. So obviously, you've just started at, you've already had a group of people who don't like the UNSC or the UEG, and now you've essentially said, okay, well, we're now going to put our military arm in your backyard, and these people are not your, you don't know these people, and all they're there for is to enforce the rules. Well, yeah, it wasn't going to turn out well. Now, on the UEG side, in 2491, there was a doctor named Elias Carver who published some findings that became known as the Carver Findings. There's a long formal name to it, but essentially what it was is he presented a theory that the social order in the outer colonies would start to break down and eventually would lead to warfare and huge losses of life. The recommendation that Carver came from these findings was that to prevent this, the UNSC had to intercede now. Or maybe not, I shouldn't say now, but they had to intercede, and they had to stop this. They had to try to dig out the roots before they had a chance to get too deep. While there was some debate on this, both the UNSC and ONI both kind of agreed with it, and this would actually lead to the resurrection of a program that had been started way back in the interplanetary wars known as the Orion program. Essentially, it was that time it was the first time that the idea of a super soldier program, and this was the resurrection of it. Once you started getting into the 2500s, because of some changes and a realization that the math wasn't quite right that Carver used, that the prediction was actually going to be more bleak, that you would deal with, millions upon possibly billions of people dying in warfare, possibly another dark age. That would eventually lead to the creation of an implementation of the Spartan 2 program. So yeah, that's kind of like the background of it.
Mm-hmm. Just real quick, Carver was the one. I mean, so no one like holds it against him too much. Carver actually really did not like what he found, right? If I remember right, didn't he?
He really started to question it.
Didn't he commit suicide?
Yes. Yeah, he ended up committing suicide.
Ultimately because he kind of was like, he just kind of was so despairing about because I thought, wait, hang on, let me try to remember this. He took his life after Halsey confronted him, right?
Yeah, so the story is that at a mixer, a young graduate of a university who was a bright up-and-comer by the name of Catherine Halsey. At that point in time, Carver was a darling of the lecture circuit. At a meeting, or at a mixer, I should say, in a discussion, she presented to him that the factor that he used to come up with his findings was a factor of 7, and Halsey said, no, that's wrong. It should be a factor of 16.
That's right.
Which led to Halsey catching the eye of Oni, and eventually led her to run her findings, which led to the idea that the outlook was even more bleak. But one of the things that Carver had started dealing with later on was the idea that, did he predict what was going to happen, or was his math what created what happened?
It's a very, very kind of almost Oppenheimer type situation.
Yeah. So this tortured him throughout most of the last years of his life. I know it's written that Halsey, because she was so young and brash, I think she realized that she treated him a bit uncharitably, and she regretted if she had any impact in him taking his own life. I mean, that's always the debate, though, with these kind of things when you're dealing with that, like this kind of predictive stuff. It's like, does it actually predict it, or does it say, okay, here's a possibility, and those actions you take make it. Yeah, it's makes it a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of a thing. It's a bit of a mind bender, really.
Right. Well, and I mean, and like how the scary thing is right. I mean, like anyone who plays with big data knows that is legit. That's a legit concern for most things. Is you can present data however you want, but you can also present data in a way that lead people to come to it. I mean, that's the dangers of this. Is like it's never just, oh, this is the stuff this is just the data. Like there's always an agenda behind the presentation of that data, and that comes with very, very heavy responsibility sometimes. And this is a darker side of what exactly that can look like. Right. But yeah, so like that, and that kind of leads us into, what would that be, like the 2500-ish era? Okay.
Yeah, we're getting what essentially would be the years just prior to the Human Covenant War.
Right, which I think we'll probably talk about that in the advanced session, because that was actually kind of a stroke of miraculous luck in a way, for at least Oni's saving face a bit. I would argue, because they're like, oh look, conveniently we have these things ready.
I mean,
what? It took 8 years to develop them, and we only knew about the Covenant for 2 months? No, that's
yeah. Well,
gloss over that detail.
Yeah, it's like in reality, in the Halo universe anyway, it wasn't until after the end of the Human Covenant War where the true nature of the Spartan 2 program started to come out. I mean, it had been made public during the Human Covenant War as a propaganda tool to try to
wasn't
boost.
Wasn't that kind of the premise behind Hunt the Truth, though? Wasn't Ben involved in that? Or was that...
Yes. Yeah, that's...
Okay.
Essentially, the idea was... I mean, the rumors had started to go out from there.
Right.
But, so the idea was on the Hunt the Truth with Ben Jarreau. Oni contracted him to do a spot on Master Chief to try and put a good face on the Spartan 2 program. These were brave volunteers who... and
I mean, that statement is not necessarily wrong, but it's also not true. Like,
it's one of those things that, and I mean, we're maybe getting a little off topic. I mean, the Spartan 2 program was a dirty secret, by Oni, by the UNSC, even, not to mention the scientists and everyone who was involved in that. But the impact of it, and especially dealing with what happened in the Human Covenant War, humanity would have been definitely in a worse position without that.
Right. That's 100% true. Yeah. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's do a round of shout outs, and we'll close out the intro session, and then we can definitely dive into the Human Covenant War incidents, both before and during. So we'll talk that in the advanced session. But real quick, for intro session shout outs, what do you got for us, Pens?
Obviously, to you guys for having me on. Thanks again. I do appreciate it. And just a general shout out. Things have been rough, and I know that there's people out there who are struggling. If you happen to be in the FFC, in the Guardian of the Lord Discord, or even if you're not, and you're just in the voice and you need to, and you're feeling down or whatnot, find somebody to talk to. If you're in the Discord, you can always reach out to me or anyone like that, but take care of yourselves, take care of your family, stay safe, and be smart.
Definitely. And, you know, and I know not only that, but there's also the Guardians of Mental Health group. They used to be the Saint 14 Project. Now they're Guardians of Mental Health. They have great resources. And they always are really very good about if you reach out, they have some really, really top-notch individuals that are associated with them. Also, just, same right back to you, Pence. I really appreciate you taking the time and putting together the notes and taking the time to actually walk us through all this stuff. It's really, really cool, and it's really, I think, an opportune time to kind of do a refresher on where we've been with Halo and where, hopefully we might even go in the future with Halo Infinite. So I'm really, really excited to see that every time they drop something. Every time they give us a new little tidbit, I'm like, yes, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, we're really hoping that we'll start seeing some more here in the next couple of months.
I'm going to be surprised if we don't, just with everything else coming out on the Xbox side. But that being said, I want to thank everyone for your time. And until next time, remember, with wisdom we conquer, stand strong, stand tall, and keep exploring. With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/FocusedFireChat. Links to all our episode archives can be found at www.thelorenetwork.com. Please be sure to email us at focusedfirechat@gmail.com with any comments and or questions for the team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. So until next time, focus your fire and may your light shine bright.
You've been listening to a Robots Radio podcast. Smart shows for interesting people. Check out all the shows at robotsradio.net.